Okay, let's talk about seller and buyer concessions. Now, what are concessions? Or concessions are things you're giving, right? I'm conceding to give you this. Buyer and seller concessions. In the traditional market back in the day, and the buy we used to have buyers that you just didn't have the cash to pay for all of your closing costs, so you would ask the seller to contribute to your closing costs typically. So it's called seller concessions, like, in other words, seller paid closing costs. So you are asking as you're offering, hey, I don't have all the money to cover all my closing costs, will the seller help me with that? And typically, how that's done is the buyer will increase the offer amount to offset that to the seller. So basically, you're technically financing your closing costs because the seller is going to turn around and give that money back to you in the form of covering your closing costs. Well, guess what? In this multiple offer environment, that isn't very attractive to a seller right now. Because now that extra money that you've increased, the house has to appraise for that, and yet they're not getting that money, they're giving it back to you. So that's not a real attractive thing for a seller. So if you can, by all means, afford to not have seller pay for your closing costs, then I would highly recommend that. No seller concessions. Now, on the flip side of that, um, what are buyer concessions or seller concessions? So, in other words, what can a buyer do to offset the seller's closing costs? Well, we've covered some of them: the home warranty, the title policy, and in some cases, if it's really crazy out there, a buyer, if they're in the financial position to do so, can cover some of the real estate agent commissions, offset that cost. You got to look at a concession as anything that is like a closing cost, and is there something that the seller's having to pay for that you, as a buyer, to make your offer stronger, can pay for on behalf of the seller? Those are concessions. So have your real estate agent kind of talk to you about uh, buyer concessions. What can I do? What can I give the seller? Like I said, the home warranty, the title policy, those are concessions. So, some of the trends, like I said, that you're seeing out there, um, they're basically, I'll pay your property taxes. When the seller goes to sell the property, they're responsible for the property taxes from the January up till closing. Well, some buyers out there say, you know what? I will pay that whole year, that your portion of those property taxes. It's another way of giving the seller more money at the bottom line, their net proceeds. Moving expenses. The seller's got to move. Look at potentially paying for the seller to move, or if they've got to rent a pod or something like that. That's another thing that you're thinking outside the box. You could do that. Say they have to move into a hotel for a period of time while their house is getting ready, or when they close on their deal. Offer to pay for that short-term rental, hotel room or Airbnb or whatever the seller is doing. A good agent's going to reach out to the buyer or out to the seller to find out, what is the situation with the seller when they move. Are they having to go into temporary living? So these are some of the concessions that you want to consider. Not saying you have to do them, but it's just another way to make your offer stand out in the seller's point of view. So something to consider. Let's go on to the next slide and let's talk about one of the most critical things in a real estate contract in Texas is the option period. And let's talk about